If you've been following these modules in sequence, then you've seen how the 6-step decision process works in AlphaACT HAZMAT. The session feedback page follows the Utilize page and shows how well you did on the scenario. In this module, we'll learn about what the session feedback page contains and how AlphaACT HAZMAT scoring works. But before we do, I want to go back and explain a little bit more about the training scenarios. Training scenarios in AlphaACT HAZMAT read a bit like very brief short stories. Like most stories, a scenario is told from the point of view of the people involved in it, primarily the first responders who arrive on the scene after some event has taken place, but also the witnesses and victims who tell the first responders what they saw or what they think happened. As is typical in actual incidents, first responders have to piece together information about the event based on what they see, what they sense, and what they learn from those who were affected by the event. They have to make assumptions that may be right or wrong. No matter what assumptions they make, there's a set of facts behind every event, and the same is true of the training scenarios in AlphaACT HAZMAT. Each training scenario is based on a specific set of conditions that affect the resulting consequences of the event. When you take a training scenario, your goal is to determine what the actual event conditions are. AlphaACT HAZMAT helps you through the process of deduction, but in the end, you may get some event conditions right and some wrong. And just like in a response to real events, that will have a bearing on how successful your decisions about protective actions turn out. AlphaACT HAZMAT compares the actual event conditions the scenario is based on to the event conditions that you decided on as you played the scenario. This is a large part of scoring and important to understand as we take a look at what the session feedback page contains. The main body of the page is divided into two parts. The top section shows you your final score, and the bottom section lets you compare your results to the event that the scenario was based on. The page also includes the dashboard along the right side, where we've come to expect it. After we review these areas of the page, we'll take a closer look at the methodology behind the scoring system used by AlphaACT HAZMAT. Your final score for the scenario is shown at the top of the page, alongside the column for the points available to help you put your score into context. By clicking on the score category headings, you can see a scoring breakdown that shows how well you did in different areas. Your score is rated along the total score line. We'll get into the details of scoring in just a few minutes. Just below the scoring breakdown, AlphaACT HAZMAT compares the event characteristics you selected to the characteristics of the event on which the scenario was actually based. The comparison lets you see just how close you got to correctly assessing event conditions. It also shows the incident maps, so you get a visual feel for how well you protected the populations affected by the event. The dashboard on the session feedback page is similar to what appears on the dashboard of past pages. The total time it took you to complete the training scenario is shown, and as we'll learn, this is factored into the score you're given for the scenario. So what is scoring based on? At the highest level, it's about two things: the outcome, essentially the results you came up with, and the process by which you got there. But what does that really mean? Let's dig a little deeper. The outcome is based on three things. The first is case similarity, how accurately the characteristics of your event match the characteristics of the event the scenario is based on. The other two involve decision accuracy, how closely the isolation zone and protective action zone distances of your event match the distances of the event the scenario is based on. The process you use in arriving at a decision is measured based on several things. The first is overall time. That is, how long it takes you to work the scenario from the beginning of the characterized step to the end of the dramatized step. You're also measured on how quickly you move from one set of steps to the next. AlphaACT HAZMAT measures the time it takes you to do the characterize and recognize steps, the time it takes to get through the analyze and customize steps, and how much time you spend on the dramatize page. Other considerations are factored into scoring as well, including whether you take appropriate actions at the customize and dramatize steps of the decision process. In AlphaACT HAZMAT, 1,000 points are at stake when you play each scenario. Case similarity, which is based on how many of the event characteristics you accurately match, counts for 300 points, while decision accuracy, which is based on how closely you match the size of the isolation zone and the protective action zone, is worth 200 points for each of the zones. Process involves the overall time it takes you to reach a decision, as well as the time it takes you to move from one step to another within the 6-step decision process. It also rewards taking certain actions related to protective actions on the Customize and Dramatize pages. The weighting designed into the scoring methodology tries to realistically balance the conflicting needs of the timeliness of a decision against its accuracy, reinforcing the principle that a good enough decision made quickly is often better than a more accurate decision made too late. The details of how many points are awarded for each of these sub-items is included in the AlphaACT HAZMAT User's Guide. Decision accuracy, which is based on how closely you match the sizes of the isolation zone and the protective action zone, is an interesting aspect of scoring that bears a little closer scrutiny. In the best possible situation, your decision puts the zone sizes nearly dead on to those of the event the scenario is based on. Doing that will get you the maximum number of points. But you could overestimate or underestimate the sizes of these zones with differing effects. If you overestimate the size of the needed zones, the protective actions you put in place may be more conservative than they need to be to ensure personnel protection. You might clear out an area far larger than it has to be, causing unnecessary expense associated with the response to the emergency. People will be appropriately safeguarded, but the costs of the response might be embarrassingly large. Scoring in this kind of situation will still get you points, but not as many as you might have had you more accurately assessed the needed size of the zones. If you underestimate the size of the zones, however, you have a very different kind of problem. The lives and health of people may be affected when they are not evacuated or sheltered when they should have been. AlphaACT HAZMAT scores this by taking away points because such consequences are so potentially disastrous. As a result, it's possible to get a negative score based on decision accuracy. This reflects that it's better to overestimate than underestimate the sizes of the isolation zone and protective action zone. Once your play of a scenario has been scored using the criteria we've just discussed, your total score is rated. Scores ranging from 801 points to 1,000 are rated as excellent. Scores from 601 points to 800 points are rated as good. Scores from 401 to 600 points are considered okay, and scores from negative 200 to a positive 400 points definitely need improvement. Once you've reviewed the session feedback page, you're done with the training scenario. At this point, you can complete an after-action review. This allows you to answer a detailed set of questions about the issues you faced and the decisions you made during the play of the scenario. You can also play another scenario by clicking Start Over. This completes our review of the session feedback page of AlphaACT HAZMAT. During this series of modules, we've reviewed how to use AlphaACT HAZMAT as a training tool. If you've taken away nothing else from these modules, I hope it'll be that AlphaACT HAZMAT is an easy-to-use training tool that can help you simulate the kind of high-stakes response situations you may one day find yourself in. It's a tool that can expose you to a broad range of event scenarios that will help better prepare you for the real thing, when, not if, it occurs.